A 70-year-old janitor was escorted out by security on his last day. The CEO laughed as he threw away the old man's belongings. But when he opened the locker, his laughter died. What he found inside changed everything. The fluorescent lights of Titanium Tech headquarters buzzed overhead as Thomas Weber pushed his cleaning cart down the executive hallway for the last time. At 70 years old, his hands were weathered, his back permanently curved from decades of bending over mops and buckets, and his uniform, though clean, had been patched so many times that the original fabric was barely visible. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Friday. In 13 minutes, Thomas's 40-year career at Titanium Tech would officially end. 40 years of arriving at midnight, cleaning until 8 a.m., then going home to sleep while the rest of the world worked their day jobs. 40 years of being invisible. The executive floor was different from the rest of the building. Here, the carpet was thick enough to sink into. The walls were decorated with modern art that Thomas suspected cost more than he'd earned in entire years. Glass offices lined both sides of the hallway, each one containing furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a workplace. Thomas had cleaned every inch of this floor, thousands of times. He knew which executives left coffee rings on their desks, which ones worked late enough to say hello to him occasionally, and which ones looked right through him as if he were part of the furniture. At the end of the hallway was the corner office. The biggest one. The one that belonged to Derek Castellano, CEO of Titanium Tech and, as of 6 months ago, the youngest self-made billionaire in the technology sector. At 34, Derek had built Titanium Tech from a startup in his garage to a company worth $12 billion. His face was on magazine covers. He gave TED Talks. He was considered a visionary, a disruptor, a genius. He was also, in Thomas's quiet opinion, one of the cruelest men he'd ever encountered. Thomas could see Derek through the glass walls now, still at his desk despite the late hour. He was on the phone, laughing at something, his feet propped up on his desk in $3,000 Italian loafers. His suit probably cost more than Thomas's car. His watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe, could have paid off Thomas's mortgage twice over. Derek saw Thomas approaching and his expression shifted. Not to friendliness, but to something like amusement. The kind of amusement a cat might show when spotting a mouse. He ended his phone call and stood up, opening his office door. "Thomas," he called out, his voice echoing down the empty hallway. "I almost forgot. Tonight's your last night, isn't it?" "Yes, Mr. Castellano," Thomas said quietly, stopping his cart. 40 years as of midnight." 40 years, Derek repeated, shaking his head with exaggerated wonder. 40 years of pushing a mop around. That's certainly something. He walked closer, and Thomas could smell his expensive cologne. "Tell me, Thomas, what does a man accomplish in 40 years of cleaning toilets?" Thomas felt heat rising in his face, but he kept his voice steady. "I kept the building clean, sir. I did my job." "Your job?" Derek laughed. "Yes, I suppose you did. The bare minimum, every single night. No ambition, no drive to be anything more. Just showing up, pushing your cart, collecting your paycheck. Do you know what I accomplished in 40 years? Oh wait, I'm only 34. Do you know what I accomplished in just 15 years, Thomas?" Thomas didn't answer. He'd learned long ago that when men like Derek asked questions like this, they weren't looking for responses. They were looking for audiences. "I built an empire," Derek continued, spreading his arms wide. "I created something from nothing. I disrupted entire industries. I made myself a billionaire through intelligence, innovation, and sheer force of will. While you were mopping floors, I was changing the world." "Yes, sir," Thomas said simply. Derek's smile faltered slightly. He'd clearly been expecting more reaction, more hurt, more acknowledgement of his superiority. Thomas's quiet dignity seemed to frustrate him. "You know what's funny?" Derek said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "The company is replacing you with an automated cleaning system. Robots. Thomas. We're replacing you with robots because even machines can do your job better than you did. Faster, more efficiently, and without needing health insurance or retirement benefits." Thomas felt something twist in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. I hope they serve the company well, sir. Oh, they will, Derek assured him. They'll save us hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. No sick days, no vacation time, no workers' compensation claims when someone's ancient back gives out. He looked Thomas up and down. 40 years, and you're being replaced by machines. What does that tell you about your contribution here? Before Thomas could respond, Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression brightened. I have to take this. It's Tokyo. Enjoy your retirement, Thomas. Try not to spend your pension all in one place. He laughed at his own joke and disappeared back into his office, already talking animatedly on the phone. Thomas stood there for a moment, his hand gripping the handle of his cleaning cart until his knuckles went white. Then he took a deep breath and continued down the hallway. He had 2 hours of work left, and he'd never left a job unfinished in his life. He wasn't going to start now. The building's head of security, Marcus Green, found Thomas in the break room at 11:55 p.m. Marcus was 45, had worked at Titanium Tech for 15 years, and unlike most people in the building, he'd always treated Thomas with respect. Thomas, Marcus said, his voice heavy. I need to escort you out when your shift ends. Thomas looked up from where he was organizing his cleaning supplies. Escort me out? I've been leaving this building at 8 a.m. every morning for 40 years, Marcus. I think I know the way. Marcus looked uncomfortable. It's company policy for departing employees. I'm supposed to make sure you clear out your locker, hand over your ID badge and keycard, and then walk you to your car. I'm sorry, Thomas. I tried to tell them you didn't need an escort, but Mr. Castellano insisted. Thomas finished quietly. Marcus nodded. He said something about protecting company property and ensuring proper protocols. I'm really sorry. Don't be, Thomas said, managing a small smile. You're just doing your job. Just like I've been doing mine. At exactly midnight, Thomas's keycard stopped working. The little light on the door reader turned red instead of green, and he heard the electronic lock click into place. After 40 years of unlimited access to the building, he was now locked out. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Marcus led him to the employee locker room in the basement. It was a stark contrast to the executive floor, with flickering lights, cracked tiles, and the perpetual smell of industrial cleaner. Thomas's locker was number 247, the same one he'd been assigned on his first day in 1985. Take your time, Marcus said gently. Get whatever you need. Thomas opened the locker. Inside were the accumulated possessions of 4 decades, a spare uniform, a pair of work boots, a faded photograph of his late wife Margaret taped to the inside of the door, a small radio he'd listened to during long night shifts, and a metal lunchbox that Margaret had given him on his first day of work. He began taking things out slowly, placing them in the cardboard box Marcus had provided. His hands lingered on the photograph. Margaret had been gone for 5 years now. Cancer. By the time they'd caught it, it was too late. The medical bills had taken everything they'd saved. Everything except. You okay, Thomas? Marcus asked. Just remembering, Thomas said softly. Margaret used to make my lunch every single night before she went to bed. Even when she was sick, even when she could barely stand, she'd make sure I had something to eat during my shift. She said. His voice caught. She said everyone deserves to have someone who cares whether they eat or not. Marcus looked away, giving Thomas a moment of privacy. Thomas reached to the very back of the locker, where a small metal box was tucked behind his boots. It was locked, about the size of a shoebox, and covered in decades of dust. He wiped it off carefully and placed it in his cardboard box with his other belongings. What's in there? Marcus asked curiously. Just some personal items, Thomas said. Nothing important. They were walking toward the exit, Thomas carrying his box and Marcus walking beside him, when Derek Castellano appeared. He must have been watching the security cameras because his timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Well, well, Derek said, that same cruel amusement in his voice. The janitor's final walk of shame. Let me see what 40 years of service amounts to. He reached for Thomas's box before the older man could react, pulling it from his hands. Mr. Castellano, Marcus said sharply. That's not necessary. I'm the CEO, Marcus, Derek said without looking at him. I decide what's necessary. He began rifling through the box, pulling items out and examining them with exaggerated interest. Let's see. A ratty old uniform. Wow, what a treasure. Work boots that should have been thrown away a decade ago. A radio that probably doesn't even work anymore. And what's this? He pulled out the photograph of Margaret. Is this your wife, Thomas? She's. He paused, studying the photo. She was a cleaning lady too, wasn't she? I can tell by the uniform in the background. A janitor married to a janitor. How wonderfully predictable. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Derek tossed the photo back in the box carelessly and pulled out the metal lunchbox. Vintage, he said mockingly. This might actually be worth something. Maybe $5 at a flea market. Then his hand closed around the small locked metal box. And what's this? Your secret treasure chest. He shook it, hearing something rattle inside. What are you hiding in here, Thomas? Your life savings? Probably amounts to what I spend on lunch. That's private, Mr. Castellano, Thomas said, his voice low but firm. Please give it back. Private. Derek's eyes lit up with malicious curiosity. Oh, now I definitely need to see what's inside. Marcus, get bolt cutters. Sir, I don't think, Marcus began. That's an order, Marcus, Derek snapped. Get bolt cutters now, or start looking for a new job. Marcus looked at Thomas apologetically, then disappeared down the hallway. Thomas stood frozen, watching as Derek turned the small box over in his hands, examining it with growing interest. You know what I think, Thomas? Derek said conversationally. I think you've been stealing from the company. Little things, over the years. Office supplies, maybe. Small electronics. Things you thought no one would miss. And you've been keeping them in here, your little trophy collection of petty theft. I have never stolen anything in my life, Thomas said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. We'll see about that, Derek said. Marcus returned with bolt cutters, his face troubled. Mr. Castellano, maybe we should just. Give them to me, Derek demanded, snatching the bolt cutters from Marcus's hands. He positioned them on the small lock and squeezed. The lock snapped with a sharp crack. Derek opened the box eagerly, like a child on Christmas morning. Then his expression changed. The cruel smile faded. His eyes widened. He went very, very still. What? He whispered. What is this? Thomas closed his eyes, pain washing over his face. Inside the box were letters. Dozens of them, maybe 100, all handwritten on various types of paper. Some were on notebook paper, some on fancy stationery, some on what looked like napkins or scraps. They were all addressed to Thomas Weber, and they were all thank you notes. Derek pulled one out at random and read aloud, his voice uncertain. Dear Thomas, I hope you don't mind that I'm leaving this note on your cart. I'm the new junior analyst in accounting, and I wanted to thank you for what you did last Tuesday. I was working late, crying at my desk because I'd made a huge mistake that I thought would get me fired. You came in to clean, and you didn't say anything about me crying. You just quietly left a pack of tissues on my desk and a note that said, Everyone makes mistakes. Tomorrow is a new day. That small kindness meant more to me than you could know. I didn't get fired. I fixed my mistake. And every time I see you now, I remember that someone cared. Thank you. Sarah P. Derek's hand was shaking slightly as he put that letter down and picked up another. Dear Thomas, you probably don't remember me, but I'm Michael from IT. Last year, my mother died, and I was a complete mess. I stayed late at the office every night because I couldn't face going home to an empty apartment. You started leaving me sandwiches. You never said anything about it, just left them on my desk with a napkin and a plastic fork. It took me 3 weeks to realize it was you. I wanted you to know that those sandwiches, and knowing that someone noticed I was hurting, helped me survive the worst period of my life. Thank you. Michael R. Derek grabbed another letter, and another. His hands moved faster, pulling out note after note, his face growing paler with each one. Dear Thomas, I'm the single mom who works in customer service. You probably noticed I've been sleeping at my desk sometimes. My apartment got flooded, and I couldn't afford anywhere else to stay. You never reported me. Instead, you left me a pillow and a blanket in my bottom drawer. You saved my job and kept my secret. I'm in a new apartment now. Thank you for your kindness. Jennifer M. Dear Thomas, I'm the executive assistant who threw up in the bathroom every morning for 3 months. You figured out I was pregnant before I told anyone. You started leaving crackers and ginger tea bags in the bathroom for me, tucked behind the paper towels where no one else would see them. You helped me through the worst of my morning sickness without making me feel ashamed. My daughter is 5 now. Thank you. Patricia L. Dear Thomas, you saved my life. I mean that literally. You found me on the roof last March, and you didn't call security or make a big scene. You just sat down next to me and told me about your wife, about how she'd fought cancer, about how she'd told you that pain is temporary but death is permanent. You talked to me for 3 hours. You made me promise to call the suicide hotline. I did. I got help. I'm still here because of you. Thank you. Anonymous. Derek's hands were shaking violently now. The letters kept coming, dozens of them, hundreds of small acts of kindness over 40 years. People Thomas had helped, comforted, supported, saved. Employees at every level of the company, from janitors to vice presidents, all writing to thank the man who'd seen them as human beings. Marcus was reading over Derek's shoulder now, tears streaming openly down his face. Dear Thomas, I'm the guy you found passed out drunk in the parking lot. Instead of calling the cops, you drove me home in my own car, then walked 5 miles back to the office. You left me a note that said, "Everyone falls down sometimes. What matters is getting back up." I've been sober for 8 years now. Thank you. Robert K. Dear Thomas, I'm the intern who couldn't afford lunch. You must have noticed because you started, accidentally, making too much food and leaving the extras in the break room fridge with my name on them. You did this for 6 months until I got hired full-time and could afford to feed myself. I'll never forget your kindness. David S. Derek found a letter written on expensive stationery, dated just 3 months ago. He read it aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Dear Thomas, I'm the executive who you found crying in my office at 3 a.m. My son had just told me he was gay, and I didn't know how to react. I'm ashamed to say my first response was anger and rejection. You, a janitor I'd barely noticed in 15 years, sat down and told me about your nephew who you loved dearly, who was gay, who killed himself because his family rejected him. You told me that love is more important than pride. You told me that children are gifts, no matter who they love. I went home that morning and hugged my son. We're closer now than we've ever been. You saved my relationship with my child. How do I even begin to thank you for that? Philip M., Vice President of Operations. The box was filled with letters like these. Stories of kindness, of compassion, of a man who'd spent 40 years noticing the people everyone else ignored. Of someone who'd used his invisibility not as an excuse to do less, but as an opportunity to do more. At the bottom of the box was a larger envelope, worn and faded. Derek opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting on hospital stationery. My dearest Thomas, Derek read aloud, his voice cracking. I'm writing this from my hospital bed, and I know I don't have much time left. I wanted to make sure you knew how proud I am of you. You think you're just a janitor, but you're so much more than that. You're the kindest man I've ever known. For 45 years, you've been my husband, my best friend, my hero. You never got rich. You never got famous. But you made the world better every single day by treating people with dignity and love. That's worth more than any amount of money. I'm not afraid to die because I know I'm leaving the world in the hands of people like you. Keep being kind, my love. Keep seeing people. Keep making a difference. That's your legacy. All my love, forever and always, Margaret. The silence that followed was absolute. Derek stood holding Margaret's letter, his face white, his hands shaking. Around him, scattered on the floor, were hundreds of pieces of evidence that the man he'd mocked, the man he'd called worthless, the man he'd replaced with robots, had touched more lives and made more of a difference than Derek ever had. Marcus was crying openly now. "Thomas," he said softly, I never knew about any of this." "That was the point," Thomas said quietly. "Kindness isn't supposed to be about recognition. It's supposed to be about helping." Derek looked up at Thomas, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the weathered face, the kind eyes, the dignity that no amount of cruelty could diminish. He saw a man who'd spent 40 years building something far more valuable than any company. He'd built a legacy of compassion. Derek tried to speak, but his voice failed him. I don't understand. Why didn't you ever tell anyone about this? You could have used these letters to prove your value, to get promotions, to demand respect." "Because that's not why I did it," Thomas said simply. "I helped people because they needed help, not because I wanted credit for it." Derek looked down at the letters again. His whole body was shaking. "I called you worthless," he whispered. "I said you'd accomplished nothing. I replaced you with robots. I was going to throw away your belongings like they were garbage." "Yes," Thomas said. "You did all of those things. Derek's voice broke completely. "I'm a monster." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You're a young man who's spent so long chasing success that he forgot to chase meaning. There's a difference." Derek collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. "What have I done?" he whispered. "What have I become?" Marcus looked at Thomas. "Did you keep every thank you note you ever received?" "Every single one," Thomas confirmed. "On the hard nights when my back hurt, or I was tired, or I felt invisible, I'd take out this box and read a few letters. They reminded me why the work mattered." Derek looked up at Thomas with red-rimmed eyes. How did you do it? How did you stay kind in a world that treated you like you were nothing?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "My wife used to tell me that we all have a choice every single day. We can make the world a little better or a little worse. Those are the only two options. Standing still isn't possible because every interaction either adds light or adds darkness. I chose to add light whenever I could. Even when people like me added darkness?" Derek asked. "Especially then," Thomas said. "Because the world needs more light to balance out the darkness." Derek stood up slowly. He began gathering the letters carefully, placing them back in the box with a reverence that was completely different from his earlier cruelty. When every letter was back inside, he handed the box to Thomas. "Mr. Weber," Derek said formally, "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it. I was wrong. About everything. About you, about value, about what matters. I've spent my entire adult life measuring success by money and power, and in 5 minutes, you've shown me that I've been measuring the wrong things." Thomas accepted the box but said nothing. "I'm going to ask you something," Derek continued, "and I don't deserve to have you say yes, but I'm going to ask anyway. Would you consider not retiring? Would you consider staying on at Titanium Tech?" "As a janitor?" Thomas asked quietly. "No," Derek said firmly. I don't even know what title to give you. Director of Human Dignity? Chief of Corporate Compassion? Those sound ridiculous, but I'm trying to say that I want you to help me transform this company. I want you to teach me and everyone else here how to see people the way you see them." Thomas studied Derek's face, searching for sincerity. "What about the robots?" "Cancelled," Derek said immediately. "I'm canceling the entire automated cleaning program. Not just canceling it, I'm investing that budget into better wages and benefits for our service staff. They're not replaceable. They're essential." "That will cost you millions," Thomas pointed out. "I have billions," Derek said. "And I'm starting to realize that none of it means anything if I'm using it to build an empire without humanity." Thomas looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked back at Derek. "I'll consider it," he said. "On one condition." "Anything," Derek said desperately. I want to see real change, Thomas said firmly. Not just words, not just a good PR story. Real, meaningful change in how this company treats every employee, from the CEO to the newest hire. Everyone gets treated with dignity, everyone gets seen, everyone matters. If you can commit to that, truly commit to it, then I'll help you. I commit, Derek said immediately. I swear to you I commit. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I'll stay. But I'm keeping my janitor uniform. Derek looked confused. Why? Because I never want to forget where I came from, Thomas said. And I never want you to forget either. The moment we start thinking we're better than the people who clean our offices, we've lost everything that matters. Derek extended his hand. Thomas shook it. It was 1:30 in the morning, in a basement locker room, but something fundamental had shifted. 3 months later, Titanium Tech looked very different. Derek had kept his promise. The changes started small, a company-wide email introducing every member of the service staff by name and photo, with a brief bio about their lives, their families, their dreams. Suddenly, the invisible people became visible. Then came bigger changes. Wages increased across the board for the lowest-paid employees. Healthcare benefits expanded. A daycare center opened in the building so working parents didn't have to choose between their jobs and their children. A tuition reimbursement program launched, offering education opportunities to any employee who wanted them. Derek created a new position, Director of Human Engagement. Thomas officially held the title, though he insisted on still cleaning one floor of the building every night. It keeps me grounded, he explained. But his real job was much bigger. He met with employees at all levels, listened to their concerns, helped leadership understand the human impact of their decisions. He became the conscience of the company. The business press called it the Titanium Transformation. Articles analyzed Derek's complete reversal in leadership style. Some praised it as visionary. Others called it a publicity stunt. Derek didn't care. For the first time in his life, he was measuring success by something other than profit margins. He also started doing something he'd never done before, learning employees' names. Not just executives, everyone. He learned about their families, their struggles, their victories. He stopped working 80-hour weeks and started spending more time actually connecting with the people who made his company run. One evening, 6 months after Thomas's retirement night that never was, Derek found the older man sitting in the executive break room reading a letter. Derek had learned to recognize that box of thank you notes. New one? Derek asked, sitting down across from him. Thomas looked up and smiled. Old one, actually. I like to reread them sometimes. May I ask you something personal? Derek said. Of course. Why did you keep working here for 40 years? You obviously have the intelligence and compassion to have done anything you wanted. Why did you choose to be a janitor? Thomas was quiet for a moment, carefully placing the letter back in its box. After Margaret and I got married, we both worked in a factory. We had dreams of starting our own business, maybe opening a restaurant. Margaret was an amazing cook. But then we found out we couldn't have children. Margaret took it hard. Really hard. Derek listened silently. One night, I was working late at the factory, and I saw the cleaning crew come through. There was this young kid, maybe 19 years old, cleaning the bathroom. He was crying while he worked. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me his mother was sick, he was trying to support his family, he'd had to drop out of college, and he felt like a failure. Thomas's eyes were distant, remembering. I talked to him for about an hour. Just listened. Mostly. Told him about some hard times Margaret and I had been through. Before I left, I gave him $50, which was a lot for us back then, and told him to buy his mother some flowers. What happened to him? Derek asked. I don't know, Thomas said. I never saw him again. But driving home that night, I realized something. I couldn't fix the big things wrong with the world. I couldn't cure diseases or end poverty or solve all the problems. But I could see people who were hurting. I could offer small kindnesses. I could make individual lives a little bit better. He looked at Derek directly. I became a janitor because janitors are invisible, and invisible people see things others miss. We see the employee crying in the bathroom. We see who's sleeping at their desk. We see who's working 3 shifts in a row because they can't afford to miss a day. We're there in the quiet hours when people's masks come off and their real struggles show. And you used that invisibility to help people, Derek said softly. I tried to, Thomas said. I didn't always succeed. But I tried every single day to make sure that anyone who was hurting knew that someone saw them, someone cared, someone was paying attention. Derek felt tears on his face and didn't bother to wipe them away. I spent 34 years trying to be remembered for building an empire, he said. You spent 40 years making sure people felt remembered for just being human. Your legacy is so much bigger than mine. It's not a competition, Thomas said gently. But if you're serious about changing, really serious, then you have the power to impact thousands of lives. You have resources I never had. You can make changes I could never make. The question is whether you'll use that power to see people or to ignore them. I want to see them, Derek said. I want to use everything I have to make sure every person in this company, in any company I influence, feels valued and seen and respected. Will you help me? I'm already helping you, Thomas said with a smile. That's why I'm here. Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. It's my sister, he said. I haven't talked to her in 5 years because I was too busy building my empire. I called her last week to apologize. We're having dinner tomorrow. That's wonderful, Thomas said warmly. I learned it from you, Derek said. You told me that empire building means nothing if you lose the relationships that matter. I'm trying to rebuild mine. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Derek asked, Thomas, do you ever regret it? Staying a janitor when you clearly had the ability to do more? Thomas thought about the question seriously. I had offers over the years, he admitted. People wanted to promote me, move me into management. But I always said no. Why? Because I realized that my job wasn't about cleaning, Thomas said. It was about caring. And I could care more effectively from where I was, seeing people in their unguarded moments, than I could from an office where everyone wore masks. I don't regret the life I chose. I got to help hundreds of people. I got to make a difference every single day. How many people can say that about their career? Derek shook his head in wonder. I have a net worth of $12 billion, and I'm pretty sure you're richer than I'll ever be. Different currencies, Thomas said wisely. You measure wealth in dollars. I measure it in lives touched. We're both rich by our own standards. Can I ask you one more thing? Derek said. Always. That night, when I was so cruel to you, when I mocked you and humiliated you and went through your belongings like they were trash. Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you defend yourself? Thomas looked at Derek with those kind, weathered eyes. Because you were hurting, he said simply. People who are truly happy don't feel the need to tear others down. I could see your pain even if you couldn't. You'd built this incredible company, made all this money, achieved everything the world told you to achieve, and you were still empty inside. You were attacking me because you were really attacking yourself. Derek stared at him. How could you possibly have seen that? 40 years of watching people, Thomas said. You learn to recognize the difference between someone who's cruel because they're happy and someone who's cruel because they're desperate. You were desperate, Derek. Desperate for meaning, for connection, for something real beneath all the success. I was, Derek whispered. I still am sometimes. That's okay, Thomas said. The important thing is that you're trying now. You're building something real, something that matters beyond money. That takes courage. Derek reached out and took the box of letters from Thomas. Can I read more of these? He asked. I want to understand better. Of course, Thomas said. But I want something from you in return. Anything. Start your own box, Thomas said. Start seeing people, helping people, making a difference. And when people thank you, keep those thank yous. On the days when you doubt whether any of this matters, read them. Let them remind you why we do what we do. Derek nodded slowly. "I will," he promised. "I'll start tomorrow." "Start today," Thomas corrected gently. "Every day is an opportunity to add light to the world. Don't wait." That night, as Thomas pushed his cleaning cart through the executive floor one last time before heading home, he saw Derek still in his office. But Derek wasn't working. He was talking to the night security guard, asking about his family, learning his name, seeing him as a human being rather than just another employee. Thomas smiled. The work was far from over, and there would be setbacks, but something fundamental had changed. A billionaire CEO had learned to see people, and that visibility would ripple outward, affecting thousands of lives. Margaret had been right, Thomas thought as he headed toward the elevator. Pain is temporary, but the impact we have on others, the kindness we show, the people we help, that's permanent. That's what echoes through time. His cart squeaked slightly as he pushed it, and Thomas made a mental note to oil the wheels tomorrow. After 40 years, he knew this building intimately, every sound, every corner, every person who worked here. And now, finally, after 4 decades of being invisible, Thomas Weber was seen. Not because he'd changed, but because someone had finally learned to look. The screen hadn't shown a bank balance. It had shown something far more valuable. Hundreds of lives touched, thousands of small kindnesses, for decades of choosing to add light to the world instead of darkness. And that legacy, Thomas knew, was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. As the elevator doors closed, Thomas pulled out his phone and looked at his new screensaver, a photo from last week's company event where Derek had publicly thanked Thomas and announced the creation of the Margaret Weber Compassion Fund, a $1 million endowment to support employees facing hardship. Thomas's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. Margaret would have loved this. She would have been so proud. He hit the button for the ground floor and smiled to himself. Tomorrow, he'd come back and do it all again. Push his cart, clean the offices, and watch for people who needed to know that someone saw them, someone cared, someone was paying attention. Because that's what truly wealthy people did. They gave away the one thing that mattered most: their time, their attention, their compassion. And Thomas Weber was the richest man he knew.